You've had a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. So, it's fair to ask you, where is the distinction? Is there a line between art cinema and studio cinema, I guess, at some level?
Yeah.
But more specifically, I guess, on that idea of film as art versus art house.
Right. Well, I think art house is a distribution concept, really, an exhibition distribution category. And it's a good one, because I think if you don't make that distinction, then you end up having to just sort of assimilate all of the commercial product that's sort of thrown at you. So it's sort of nice to say, okay, we have certain canons of validation. They may be flexible. They may change given the box office and whatever. But, there's a concern for an initially art film. Now, of course, in your tradition, your family, it was a concern for European cinema. So you had a situation where you were like Europeans in LA. And so you still carried an old world sensibility, and that came through the productions, it came through your studio, it came through what you're doing. So in a sense, art film was a European film. And art film
anything that wasn't English language.
Anything that wasn't, quote, studio. But, Greg, the majority of it was studio production.
Absolutely. And
so, I mean, you're all looking you were looking at films that were produced in Germany, and very studio stuff, in France, studio stuff, even Sweden. And so it was like, although it was sort of international cinema, it sort of became art cinema because it was not American cinema. Mm-hmm. But then underneath that, there's a secondary layer, which is a concern with the subject of the nature of the beautiful and the nature of the good, which sort of runs you into looking at aesthetics and ethics. So those 2 points are sort of different in, quote, European art cinema than what's predominant, or what was predominant in North American cinema. Mm-hmm. Because the concern there was, I think, essentially more box office than it was, shall we say, the nature of the beautiful and the nature of the, quote, good. And so there was a kind of a different mentality, in a sense, between a European studio film, although they were still motivated by capitalism, right? They had to make money. But you look at all the European directors that came over in the 30s, right? I mean, about every major director out of France and Germany came here. Mm-hmm. And what they did to the studio system was basically rewire it, right? And so you were moving from Griffith into this sort of European thing, Lubitsch and the rest, and then you sort of move out of that back into the Americana, and then we move back to Europe in the 1970s, and at that point that becomes really the art film, right? Then it becomes unabashedly, quote, art. People like, Fellini, Antonioni, Bergman, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's a completely valid thing to say that we're interested in art cinema, because there's still a concern with the nature of art, and that carries with it cultural baggage, aesthetic baggage, concerns with things like the sublime, concerns about things like transcendental issues, mm-hmm. concerns with what is the nature of poetics or poetry in the art form itself. And a lot of those issues, in a studio context, they just sort of disappeared or dissipated.
Right. So that brings us maybe perhaps to The Fishing Place, which is your new film that we want people to see.
You can edit this, Greg. Right? You can make me sound articulate or
no. It's a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate having it, because I guess even at the most crass level of a big budget studio film, you can have moments of art.
Yes.
I don't want to say that it's not present or not possible to have it present there. It's not the primary focus of the people making the film. They want to make money.
It has to be present, or it's not going to work. Okay, it's one of the intangible, ineffable things where beauty and truth have to endure, even in a pile of blank, because there's a sense that what is it that attracts the human being? It is the soul. It mm-hmm. is the essence of beauty or truth that somehow is announced poetically, right, in the context, in the event. So all cinema has to, whether it likes it or not, has to touch into the poetic, the metaphorical, has to touch into the dream, has to touch into those states of consciousness that may be not intended by the studio, right? but essential for communication, or essential for it to work. And that's the art, the poetry, the intangible is the thing why Hollywood has not been able to make a blockbuster after a blockbuster. If they had their way, as you know, every film would make $300 million. Every film would be knocking down the box office. Every film would work. Everyone would be successful. But look at the percentage of, quote, financially viable pictures that come out of Hollywood, or not just picking on Hollywood, out of the studio system anywhere, and even out of
Sundance. I mean, let's okay. Any film festival doesn't have to be Sundance. You're
going to get me in trouble. I'm trying to make a point. That you got to have art. You got to have art, even in, because if it's not there, it's not going to work. And that you can't predetermine it. You've got to find it when it happens, and or allow it to happen, or let it to announce itself. If you sort of try with research and scientific methodology to come up with the perfect film, right, with the perfect star, with the perfect studio, with the perfect writer, with the perfect DP, that seems to be a recipe for box office failure.